Colm forced his way through the dense underbrush, each step a jolt of pain from the wound festering in his hip. He could no longer bear full weight on his right leg, and the pounding rain turned the earth to muck beneath his boots, dragging every movement into slow, aching misery. It was a fitting night, he thought, for the death of a country. He leaned on a tree to catch his breath, his chest heaving with the strain of the escape. Behind him, the distant crashes echoed. Whether the crack of thunder or the roar of cannons, he could not tell. It no longer mattered. A full sunrise smeared the edge of the world, struggling to pierce the dense shroud of black clouds that suffocated the sky. But it was midnight, and the glow was no dawn. It was the burning of a city, the last gasp of a place he had once called home. As Colm pushed himself away from the tree, he thought of those who hadn't gotten out. Many had fled when the silhouettes of infernal vessels first blackened the horizon, but many others had remained. For those who stayed to defend their homes, he felt a grim respect. For those too weak or wounded to run, he felt a dull, helpless pity. But for those who had stayed behind out of blind faith, convinced that God would spare them, Colm felt nothing but contempt. Colm was no coward. When the call to arms rang out, he had answered without hesitation. He donned his chainmail, shouldered his axe, and clutched his battered rifle. Even as the city cracked and crumbled under the scream of enemy shells, he had stood firm alongside his countrymen, rushing to the shore to hold the line. When the infernal duke spilled the blood of captives to turn the sea itself against them, conjuring a hurricane wind stinking of sulphur, Colm only gritted his teeth and planted his boots. He had sworn to cast down whatever devils had come to poison his homeland, and he was a man of his word. The fighting had been brutal and desperate. The shelling of the naval guns was relentless as ships disgorged the legions of hell that swarmed them like a tide. From the moment he had sighted the hordes of black armoured fiends rushing at them, Colm had known the city was doomed. If they had been properly supplied and prepared, it might have been different, but supply columns that had made it to them from further inland had been rare, and the messengers they had dispatched had seldom returned. Ill-equipped to fight off any invasion, the magnitude of the one that had come had left no doubt to the outcome. Still, Colm and his countrymen had fought. They fought a desperate battle in a maelstrom of wind, rain, and fire, all for the faintest hope that they might buy a little more time for their families to escape. The rain had long since rinsed it clean, but his axe had not long ago dripped with the blood of heretics. His rifle had been cast aside long ago, emptied in the first frantic volleys before the enemy closed the distance. The sheer weight of the hordes pressing in around them, combined with the unanswered bombardment from the enemy fleet, shattered what remained of their defences. Colm had seen the walls buckle and gates torn asunder by weapons that hissed with unholy fire. The city fell not all at once, but piece by piece, block by block, shrine by shrine. Streets once lined with statues of saints ran red with blood, the cobbles slick with gore and littered with the dead and dying. He had seen the cathedral spire collapse under a direct hit, its bell shrieking one last time as they plummeted into the inferno below. Holy icons were smashed underfoot by the cloven boots of demon spawn, and the relics of saints were tossed into pyres made of broken pews and torn vestments. Where once incense had burned in reverence, now hellish fumes curled from altars desecrated with filth and blood. Demonic banners unfurled across the battlements, and in the town squares obscene idols were erected where crucifixes once stood. The screams of the dying mingled with the guttural chants of the invaders. It was not simply conquest. It was ritual. An entire city made a ritual sacrifice. Colum had fought his way back through the carnage, through alleyways lit by the orange glow of fire and strewn with broken bodies. He had struck down a black-hooded man that lunged from a collapsed house, buried his axe into the back of a heretic who was dragging a screaming woman toward a burning shrine. He kept moving, always forward, always toward the thought that perhaps, just perhaps, his family had made it out. But when he reached the narrow street where his home had once stood, there was nothing left. A naval shell had obliterated the entire row. Bricks were still glowing from the blast. His father's forge was a blackened crater. The upstairs window, where his little sister once leaned to watch the stars, had been blown apart, its frame twisted into a jagged mess of stone and timber. He searched through the wreckage anyway, dug with bloodied hands through the smouldering ruin, found only ash and bone and silence. Colum did not scream. He did not cry. He simply stood amid the ruins, the wind tearing at his cloak, the firelight dancing across his dirt-streaked face. And then he turned. With one final look at the rubble, Colum walked away from the corpse of his past and pushed through the crumbling western gate. He fled into the black woods beyond the city, woods thick with fog and shadow, where no banner flew and no prayer reached. Alone, wounded, his soul hollowed out by grief, he disappeared into that night without stars. A man who no longer belonged to the world he had tried so desperately to save. Colum's boots sank deep into the forest loam, each step a slow battle against the pull of the mire. The storm lashed through the trees, sheets of rain hammering the leaves and branches like a relentless drumbeat. The forest closed in around him like the ribs of some ancient dead beast, its gnarled limbs thrashing under the wind's assault. Fog churned along the forest floor in damp coils, shredded and whipped by gusts that hissed through the undergrowth. Above, lightning flashed through the canopy, casting ghostly light over the dense underbrush. His breath came in ragged bursts. The wound in his hip pulsed with every movement, a molten thread of pain lacing his stride. He didn't know how long he had been walking. Time had dissolved into the murk, measured only by the ache in his limbs and the steady drip of rain from his cloak's tattered hood. Then he saw it, a crooked stone, half swallowed by the earth. It jutted from the base of a twisted U like a tooth from a jawbone, its surface etched with faded symbols. Colum paused, leaning on the haft of his axe. His vision swam. The lines on the stone seemed to shimmer. He reached out, his fingers brushing the damp surface. The runes were familiar, not from sermons or holy texts, but from the quiet moments of his youth. He had seen them beneath the hearthstone of his childhood home, scrawled in charcoal by hands of his family's elders. He remembered secretly watching his mother carve symbols like these one into small stones. A wind passed through the trees, not cold, but warm and damp and heavy with the scent of loam and moss. It stirred the fog, revealing a hollow between the roots of the yew. Colum stepped closer. The hollow was small, just large enough to crawl into, and inside he saw remnants, bone-white candle stubs, a handful of small offerings, antlers, feathers, a stone stained with rust-red pigment. He sank to one knee. Rain pattered on the canopy above, soft and distant. He remembered his father coming in from the forge late at night, wiping soot from his face, sitting in silence by the fire. He remembered the silence breaking only when the church bell called out across the valley, summoning the faithful, and how his father would rise, sighing, donning his heavy coat and mutter, "Best not be seen absent," The church had sought to convert his people not by sword, but by slow erosion. Every holy day, every tithe, every whispered threat about wandering spirits and unclean rites. Like a parasite, they burrowed into his homeland, draining them of their lifeblood, of what made them strong. Colum pressed his hand to the runes. They were slick with rain, but warm beneath his touch. He did not know how he had come across this window into his people's past, but he did not believe it was coincidence. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in many years, said a prayer, not to God, but to the spirits of bark and root, stone and antler. He whispered for the forest to shelter the souls of his kin, to take their ashes into its earth, to let their spirits walk among the ancient trees as watchers and whisperers. He begged the old ones to find them in the dark and guide them home. Each word was a murmur dredged from forgotten corners of memory, spoken in the dialect of dreams of long last past. When he opened his eyes again, he was not alone. A stag stood at the edge of the clearing, massive, motionless. Its eyes glowed faintly, not like fire, but like moonlight on water. Its antlers were moss-covered, twisted like branches. It watched him in silence. Colum did not move. For a moment, the fog grew still. Then the stag turned, and with a single step, it vanished into the trees, disappearing like a breath held too long. Colum exhaled. The pain in his hip surged again, dragging him back into the weight of his body. He pushed himself upright. Whatever had stirred here was not salvation. But it wasn't lies either. He limped on through the fog, deeper into the woods, leaving behind the runes, the candles, and the first thing in days that had not made him feel utterly alone. The trees thinned without warning, giving way to a muddy track that wound through sodden fields. Colum stood at the edge of the woods, squinting into the storm, where the crumbling outline of a village emerged from the grey. Thatched roofs were pelted by the rain and shutters flapped loose in the wind. No smoke rose from chimneys, no lights burned behind windows. The place was not alive, but not quite dead either. It was paused, breathless, like a corpse that hadn't yet gone cold. He trudged into the empty street. Mud sucked at his boots with each step, and broken crates and scattered belongings floated in filthy puddles. A child's doll lay on its back in the muck, one arm torn, its grin smudged and staring. Many of the doors he passed hung open, their hinges groaning and slamming in the storm's fitful gusts. The shutters clattered in chaotic rhythm. It was clear the villagers had fled in haste. No time to bar the doors. No point trying. He passed a cart half loaded with sacks of grain. He could picture its owner giving up halfway through, instead throwing what he could on the ox and fleeing. On the inn's door, someone had smeared a crude cross with red paint, or blood. Beneath it, a torn poster clung to the wall, proclaiming some saint's feast day that would never come. Then he saw the chapel. It hunched at the village's far edge, its bell tower crooked like a snapped finger pointing nowhere. Ivy choked the stone, and the stained glass windows had been shattered inward. The door stood ajar. A faint flicker of candlelight leaked from within. He stepped inside. The smell hit him first. Not incense, but the smell of death, thick and cloying, a rancid sweetness beneath the sharper tang of old blood. It hung in the air like a fog, seeping into the wood and stone. The nave was empty, its pews askew as if shoved aside in haste. Torn hymnals littered the floor. On the altar, the candles guttered in pools of wax, barely holding their flame against the draughts. And above them, swaying gently from a beam behind the pulpit, was Father Brennich. The priest's robe was soaked through, clinging to his thin frame. His feet dangled in front of Colum's face, and his head lolled sideways, eyes open, mouth slack. A black cord cut deep into the meat of his neck. The chair he'd stood on had toppled onto its side, one leg broken. Colum stared up at the corpse. Rain drummed against the roof above them like 1,000 fists. Somewhere in the rafters, a bird cried out, a shrill, confused sound. The priest had seen the oncoming hordes of his lord's enemies and chosen to end himself rather than risk the fate of falling into their clutches. Colum stepped forward until he stood beneath the hanging body. He looked up, not in pity, but in revulsion. The man who once demanded tithes, who'd scolded his father for working on holy days, who'd denounced forest spirits as lies. He had not even faced the end on his feet. Was this the salvation they had been promised? Colum let the thought linger, bitter and venomous. This rot and silence and the stench of failure, was the reward for their obedience. Where was the might of their Lord, the fury of his angels, the thunder of divine wrath they had been taught to expect? His people had surrendered their rights, buried their gods, bent their culture into shapes approved by far-away holy men. And for what? Where was the church when the beast first prowled the woods? Where were the Crusaders when screams echoed from the valleys? Where were the Templars when the sea boiled with demon ships? Where was God when his family died beneath the rubble of their home? Colum stared one last time at the swaying corpse, the failed promise of salvation. Then, without a word, he turned. He limped out of the chapel, through the hushed village, and into the woods. No destination, just away from the lies and towards something older, colder, and more honest. The trees swallowed him again. The storm, though distant now, left its touch behind, branches slick with rain, the underbrush sodden and clinging. Colum's cloak was a sodden rag about his shoulders. The wound in his hip had turned to fire, each step a raw tearing in his flesh. Hunger gnawed at him. Thirst cracked his lips. Time unraveled. He drifted. The woods changed. He could not say when the path vanished, only that it had. One moment he was following the curve of a trail between roots, and the next he was stepping through bramble and muck, weaving through trees that leaned in close, their trunks like the limbs of ancient sentinels. Shapes moved in the corners of his vision, branches that twisted when they should not, shadows that bent unnaturally with the wind. His breath came faster. Sweat clung to his skin, cold despite the fever creeping through him. He turned, sure he had heard something. A branch snapping behind him. Nothing, only the whisper of leaves. He staggered forward. Then again, the sound, closer. A low rustle, a guttural clicking like stones grinding under water. He spun around, axe half raised, but there was only fog. Trees. Silence. His legs gave out beneath him, and he hit the ground hard, wet soil pressing against his face. He lay there, breathing hard, trembling. A bird call echoed somewhere in the trees that sounded like a shrieking laugh. He pushed himself up, blood running down his leg. His head throbbed. The wound pulsed in rhythm with the heartbeat that thundered in his ears. He dragged himself to his feet and moved again, onward, no direction, just forward, always forward. The light shifted, what little there was. Every tree looked the same now, every bush a mirror of the last. But his instinct screamed that he was being followed. The certainty pressed on his back like a hand. Once, he saw eyes in the dark, inhuman eyes, low to the ground, gleaming like wet stones. He closed his eyes and kept walking. Once, he saw antlers rising in the mist. but they twisted and pulsed like vines. And then they were gone. His thoughts frayed. Words escaped him. The pain in his side threatened to overwhelm him. He wondered if the shadows tracking him were real or hallucinations, but his instincts would not be silenced. Through the pain and delirium, he knew something watched, and it was getting closer. Colm stumbled into a clearing like a man already half dead. The trees parted just long enough to reveal a narrow black stream cutting through the muck, its surface broken by the constant hiss of drizzle. He dropped to his knees in the cold mud, crawled forward, and fell face first into the creek. The shock of water stole his breath, numbed his pain. For a moment, he did not move. Then instinct surged. He rolled onto his side, coughing water, dragging himself by elbows and fists toward the bank. Roots jutted from the creek wall, thick, gnarled things like the fingers of buried giants. He clutched at them, hauled himself beneath their tangled mass. Mud smeared his face. His cloak was shredded, hanging from him in sodden strips. But he moved with the mad strength of a dying man unwilling to die. He collapsed beneath the roots in a hollow just big enough to curl into. The air was damp and earthy, thick with the scent of rot and old water. His breath rasped loud in the close dark. He lay in filth and wet, shaking, teeth clenched so tight his jaw ached. Then he drew his knife. His axe he planted beside him, its blade buried into the bank's edge. The knife he kept close in hand, his eyes locked on the woods across the creek. Come then, he thought, come. The forest offered no answer, only the drip of rain and the rustle of unseen limbs. Minutes passed, then he saw it. A shape moved in the bushes beyond the creek. Massive, upright, horned. A silhouette pushed through the brush with slow, deliberate weight. Goat-headed, broad-shouldered, its outline rippling with coarse fur and muscle. It paused at the edge of the clearing, sniffed the air. Colm tightened his grip on the knife. The thing stepped forward, out of the dark. The creature stepped from the dark brush like a nightmare made flesh, tall, broad, its goatish skull crowned with gnarled horns slick with rain. Its body was a mass of sinew and scar, wrapped in hides and bone trinkets. A massive spear, barbed and wicked, rested in its hands, its point dripping with something darker than water. Colm didn't have the strength left to run. He rose slowly from beneath the roots, legs trembling with exhaustion, his wound a blazing knot of fire in his side. The moment he straightened to his full height, he felt the eyes of the beast lock onto his. It exhaled a low, rolling chuff, like a challenge, and thumped its spear against the mud. Colm answered with a growl, low, from the throat, a sound he didn't know he was capable of making. His fingers closed around his axe's grip. His knife he held in his other hand, blade catching faint moonlight through the branches. He had nothing left but defiance. The beastman took a step forward, teeth bared, spear ready. Colm didn't flinch. He widened his stance, baring his own teeth in reply, every muscle in his body screaming to flee. But he stayed. They stood like that, frozen in primal tableau. Two animals, one of cloth, one of fur, locked in a moment older than language. A test. Then came the grunt. From the bushes behind the creature came a harsh bark, guttural and commanding. The beastman froze, then glanced over its shoulder. With a final snort toward Colm, it backed away, lowering its weapon. Colm remained still, chest rising and falling, weapons held tight. More figures emerged from the forest. One by one, they stepped through the fog. Beastmen of varying size and shape, a dozen or more, Some bore scars across their bodies. Others were decorated with beads, feathers, and bones. All of them watched him with caution and curiosity. None approached. Then they parted. From the line of trees came another, bent-backed and draped in a patchwork of furs and moss. He leaned heavily on a gnarled staff carved with symbols that seemed to shimmer in the gloom. His horns were shorter, almost worn down, and from his neck hung a necklace of ancient stones. The others moved aside as he passed, reverent and silent. He came to stand before Colum. The rain slackened. The forest grew still. The Old One raised his head, and Colum met his gaze. The eyes that looked back were not dull or bestial. They were sharp, deep, clearer than any priest's, wiser than any man's. They shimmered with memories of firelight on cave walls, of blood rites beneath eclipsed moons, of language older than empire. And in that moment, Colum understood. This was no beast. This was something sacred. The Ancient One said nothing. But in the silence, Colum felt himself being weighed, not by what he had lost, but by what he might become. After a long pause, the Old One turned and knelt before a shallow stone that jutted from the earth like a table. From a pouch at his side, he drew strange herbs, ground bones, bits of fungus, and dark, unnameable powders. He worked with slow, practiced care, mixing the ingredients into a clay bowl with a thick black liquid that smoked faintly in the chill air. A low chant began among the beastmen, guttural, rhythmic, older than prayer. The Ancient One stirred the bowl, then turned to Colum. He offered it. Colum hesitated only a moment. He sheathed his knife, stepped forward, and took the bowl in both hands. The mixture reeked of rot and iron and something sharp and bitter that stung his eyes. He looked into the Old One's face, searching for a sign. In that ancient creature, he saw the spirits his parents had prayed to in secret. He drank. The taste was fire. It scorched his throat, clawed down his gut, and ignited something behind his eyes. It wasn't pain. It was transformation. A blaze that burned through memory, through fear, through self. He dropped the bowl. It shattered. Colum collapsed. He did not remember being lifted, only the sensation of arms with muscled like steel. He drifted through the dark, slipping between moments like falling through dream. He remembered being carried, the sound of rain, the grunt of beastmen speaking around him in their raw bark tongue. He remembered being fed, water poured down his throat. He remembered a fevered night where someone pressed burning herbs to his wound and chanted until the pain dulled. He remembered a clawed hand holding his arm steady as a jagged knife carved something into his skin, marking him with the runes his mother had once carved, naming him. Then the darkness deepened, and Colum slept. Colum awoke with a gasp, like a man surfacing from drowning. The world rushed into him all at once, smell, sound, sensation. Everything felt raw, alive, and overwhelming. The scent of wet earth, decaying leaves, and animal musk hit him with stunning clarity. He could hear the drip of water from trees, the flutter of insects in the underbrush, and the creak of boughs swaying in the breeze. And then came the pain. A splitting pressure throbbed in his skull, as though something inside was trying to push its way out. He groaned and clutched at his head. His fingertips brushed against two tender, bony nubs just beneath his scalp. They were the sprouts of antlers growing from his skull. His limbs felt wrong, too tight in his clothes, too heavy in places they shouldn't be. His boots pinched sharply, his legs twitching with strange spasms. He rolled up one pant leg and saw the skin that was darkened. the muscles beneath twitching unnaturally. His legs no longer felt like his own. They felt unnatural to him. He pushed himself up on trembling arms, sweat and rain matting his hair. His chainmail hauberk felt like a cage, pinching his shoulders, digging into his chest. He shrugged out of it with effort, casting it aside. It hit the ground with a dull, defeated thud. In the middle of the clearing he stood, dazed and disoriented. His vision pulsed with the rhythm of his own heartbeat. His breath came in ragged gulps, and beneath it all, he felt something primal beginning to stir. The beastmen were already there, encircling the clearing. They watched him with interest, their bestial eyes communicating keen amusement. A few leaned on spears. One crouched low, sniffing the air. Colum snarled without realizing it. He bared his teeth. His fingers twitched toward the empty space where his knife used to rest. But then the trees parted. The Ancient One returned, staff in hand, moving with an unhurried stride. Moss and bone talismans clung to his hide. The clearing hushed, and Colum, senses still new, instincts still raw, knew without doubt that this was no frail elder. This was something vast, something old and powerful. His knees buckled before he even thought to resist. He dropped to the earth. The Ancient One stepped forward with a quiet grunt, the talismans around his neck clicking softly as he moved. He circled Colum slowly, eyes glinting with unreadable thoughts. His staff tapped once, then again, on the ground beside Colum as he passed. He leaned close, inspecting the beginnings of horn beneath Colum's damp hair, the tightness of his frame within his too small skin. The shaman sniffed once, muttered something in a low, guttural tongue, and gave a short, satisfied nod. Another grunt, this one approving, and the elder turned away. Without warning, the Ancient One broke into a loping run, his staff swinging with an easy rhythm as he bounded into the woods on powerful sure legs. The beastmen let out a braying chorus of excitement and followed, snarling and laughing as they tore after him like hounds on the scent. Colum hesitated only a heartbeat before his body surged forward. His feet struck the earth and he ran. He expected to falter, expected his wounds, his reshaping limbs to fail him. But instead, he moved with ease. More than ease, grace, speed. The forest rushed past him in a blur of bark and root and shadow, but his footing never faltered. His legs, though strange and changing, carried him like they had always belonged to the woods. His arms pumped in rhythm, his lungs drew in great clean gulps of air. Every sense had sharpened. The rustle of a squirrel above him, the scent of wet moss and fungus, the snap of a distant twig. His reflexes sang with purpose. His awareness expanded with each stride, not just of the trail, but of the pack around him. He was part of it. And though his bones still shifted, though the horns in his skull still ached, Colum felt no fear, only hunger, energy, instinct. He had never felt so alive. This was no madness. This was clarity. The run carried them deep through the forest until, without warning, the trees broke and gave way to a narrow road carved crudely through the woods. The dirt had been churned into wide ruts by truck tires and scattered with the marks of booted feet. The beastmen slowed, their braying laughter dying into silence. The Ancient One halted at the road's edge. He crouched low, his staff resting across his knees as he muttered under his breath, fingering a set of bone talismans that hung from his belt. His eyes scanned the ground with focused intensity. Several beastmen flanked him, dropping to all fours to sniff at the tracks. Colum followed more slowly, his breathing steady despite the run. As he stepped toward the path, His nostrils flared, instinctively, involuntarily, and he staggered back in surprise. The scent struck him like a vision. He could smell the scorched tang of diesel exhaust, the metallic stink of grease clinging to overworked engines. He could taste the sweat of the men who had ridden in the backs of those supply trucks, the sharp tang of gun oil from crates of rifles, the brine of tinned fish. One had smoked a cigarette, cheap, bitter, foreign. There were at least 3 vehicles, 2 armored, 20 soldiers, maybe more, and something else. Fear. Colm blinked, stunned by the clarity. His new body was still in flux, still reshaping, but already it was capable of a sensory world he had never known. The pack milled at the roadside, sniffing, muttering, snarling low in their throats. The hunt, Colm realized, had begun. Clouds gathered fast overhead, black and roiling with menace. Thunder cracked through the sky like the opening of ancient gates. The beastmen brayed in response, a wild, joyous sound that echoed through the forest like a war cry. The Ancient One let out a sharp bark and took off running again, with purpose anew. The pack followed, crashing through underbrush and leaping over roots. Colm ran with them, his feet pounding in rhythm with the earth's pulse. His lungs filled with the electric scent of oncoming rain. They followed the scent trail along the road for a time, running parallel before peeling off into the forest. Their course twisted and dropped, weaving through thickets and gulches, tracing a curved arc ahead of the convoy's direction. They meant to intercept it. Colm's legs burned but did not fail. His body moved with an ease and unity that defied its shifting shape. His awareness extended like tendrils into the woods around him, mapping scent, sound, wind. Overhead, the clouds thickened. Lightning flashed between the boughs, and a sharp wind rose from the east, scattering leaves and howling through the limbs. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, soaking fur and skin alike. The world grew darker, louder, more alive. And still they ran. The forest began to dip, the terrain sloping down into a wide, shallow valley. Trees thinned just enough to reveal a rough stretch of road cutting clean through the basin below. The pack slowed as they approached the edge of the tree line, dropping low, instinct carrying them the rest of the way. Without signal or command, the beastmen fanned out on either side of the road, vanishing into the brush and brambles with uncanny grace. Their snarls fell silent. Colm crouched near the edge, breath steaming in the growing cold. He blinked and realized, for the first time, that he was empty-handed. His axe, his knife, even the ragged scraps of his old life. Gone. Left behind somewhere between his death and this new form. He clenched his fists in frustration, but before the feeling could take root, a heavily scarred beastman, larger than most, with a jagged gash across one eye, stepped from the underbrush. The warrior locked eyes with him, then drove a brutal barbed spear into the earth before him with a wet crunch. He offered no words, only a low grunt before slipping back into the dark foliage, vanishing as quickly as he'd come. Colm reached out, gripped the weapon. It was heavier than it looked, its shaft made from gnarled wood, its blade wicked and old. Above, thunder boomed again. Colm crouched low in the wet brush, the barbed spear resting across his knees. The storm churned above, but his mind was strangely quiet, focused. He had time now, time to think. The road that lay ahead would soon bear the wheels of trucks, the boots of men, the crack of rifles, his countrymen, soldiers in the same colors he once wore. But the thought of ambushing them brought no guilt, no hesitation. All of them were animals. Some simply had the honesty to act like it. This hunt was older than empire, older than creed. It was the old way. What had been bled from their people over generations of sermons and taxes and silent surrender. Struggle bred strength. That was truth. He did not desire slaughter for its own sake. This was not senseless bloodlust. Resources were finite. Blood, meat, weapons, all scarce. Those who passed through this road would be tested. If they were strong, they would survive, perhaps even escape, and they would be tempered by fire. But if they broke, if they fled, if they cowered, then they were not worthy to keep what they carried, not worthy of command, not worthy of survival. He gripped the spear tighter, as if in answer to his thoughts. The runes carved into his flesh began to pulse, a slow, steady throb that built into a searing heat. He sucked in a sharp breath as the symbols etched along his arms and ribs grew hot beneath the skin, not with pain, but with a kind of awakening, like a brand answering a calling. The storm above cracked open with a bolt of lightning that lit the treetops in stark white. The world held its breath. In this clearing, beneath the screaming sky, Colum understood what the path demanded, not cruelty, but judgment. Through the swell of the storm, Colum's ears caught it, the low, steady hum of engines. He turned toward the sound, senses sharpening to razor clarity. The vibrations rolled through the earth and through his bones, painting a picture in his mind more vivid than sight. The trucks were coming. The pack stiffened, beastmen tensing like coiled wire, hidden within their patches of brush and root. Spears were gripped tighter. Breath held. The storm crackled above. Moments later, the first set of headlights cut through the downpour, bouncing along the rough track through the valley. One, then two, then three trucks crawled into view. Canvas-covered and mud-splattered, their engines groaned beneath the strain of cargo and men. As the lead truck rolled directly into the trap, a silence fell, absolute and final. Then it shattered. The beastmen burst from the underbrush with a thunderous bray, howls and shrieks echoing through the trees. Spears flew through the air like javelins. One slammed through the windshield of the lead truck, impaling the driver with brutal finality. The vehicle veered, screeching as it swerved sideways into the mud. Colum leapt up with them, ready to charge. But he froze. For the first time, he saw the beast clearly, not just as brothers in the wild, not just as reflections of his own path, but as what they were, brutal, unrelenting creatures of instinct. They tore through brush and smoke, launching themselves onto the convoy with feral glee. One ripped the passenger door from the lead truck and dragged a screaming man into the mud, crushing his throat under one hoofed foot. Colum's breath caught. He had fallen in with the pack as if born to it, running as one of them, hunting like them. But this was different. This was a storm of violence made flesh. The savagery of the path laid bare. The lead truck had carried only supplies, now scattered and burning. But the others held soldiers, and they did not break. Colum watched unmoving, as the remaining trucks screeched to a halt and their passengers leapt down, blades drawn and rifles raised. Mud and rain slicked their uniforms, but they moved with grim determination, forming a ragged battle line. Their eyes were wide and they spat curses, but they stood. Colum felt a strange, distant pride of his old brethren. They would not die easy. Good. Let them prove they were worthy. Colum's reverie snapped as a voice rose above the clash. A priest, shouting defiance and prayer from the bed of one of the rear trucks. The man clutched a golden icon, his mouth frothing with scripture. His voice cut through the rain like a blade. and something in Colum broke. The old hatred surged back, white hot, blinding. Hatred for the church that had shamed his family, diluted their blood, stripped their stories and rights, poisoned the land with judgment and shame. That voice, those words, they were the chains of the church. Rage took him. Before he realized it, Colum was moving, leaping from the brush alongside his beastkin. The spear in his hands felt like an extension of his fury. Ahead, the two sides collided. Men were bowled over and gored. Beastmen with twisted horns and rusted blades slammed into the soldiers' line, some smashing through shields, others howling and biting, a frenzy of claw and steel. Spears found gaps in armor, teeth closed on screaming throats. But the soldiers fought well. They did not scatter. Those who had fought beastmen before moved with practiced violence, ducking beneath wild swings, slashing tendons, driving blades into flanks. They stayed close, covering one another. Some of the younger ones panicked, but others stepped in, calm and brutal. Colum watched one veteran move like water, using his short sword to hamstring a towering beast man, before planting a blade in its heart. Another team flanked a snarling brute and bled it from 3 sides before finishing it with a final gunshot. Blood soaked into the churned mud. Screams rang out. Rain fell harder. Colum's eyes locked onto the priest. He raised the barbed spear and hurled it with all the fury building inside him. The priest's final prayer died in his throat as the iron head drove through his chest, pinning him to the bed of the truck. The icon fell from his hands, bouncing once on the metal before vanishing in the chaos below. Colum didn't stop to watch him die. He charged forward and, as he passed the corpse of a fallen beastman, tore a brutal axe from its stiffening fingers. The weapon fit his grip perfectly, crude, heavy, hungry. With a roar that echoed from both man and beast, Colum plunged into the fray. The battle raged with unrelenting fury, but the tide had turned. The defenders, outnumbered, outmatched, began to fall beneath the ferocity of the beastmen. Though they fought with every ounce of spirit, the line buckled. One by one, they were dragged into the mud, gutted and torn apart, their screams swallowed by the storm. Colum fought like a demon beside his new kin, his axe slick with blood, his body dancing between instinct and memory. Eventually, the last of the resistance broke. All but one. A single soldier, bloodied, armor cracked, and face streaked with mud, stood alone, cornered against the side of a half-ruined truck. In each hand, he held an axe, and though his chest heaved with exhaustion, there was no fear in his eyes. He stood ready to die on his feet. The beastmen circled him, snarling and creeping closer, blood steaming from their blades. Then a voice rang out, low and thunderous, carrying through the storm like a bell. Stop. The word was not in any human tongue, but Colum understood it all the same. The pack froze. The Ancient One stepped into view, moving slowly through the wreckage of the battle. His staff struck the mud in rhythm with his steps, his talismans clinking with quiet authority. Beastmen parted before him, like smoke before wind. Colum stared as the elder came to stand just beyond the edge of the circle. He studied the lone survivor for a long moment. Then he spoke again. This time, not to the pack, but to the man. Colum heard the words in the beast tongue, but knew their meaning instinctively. You have strength, spirit. The old blood runs in your veins, but your path is not with us. The soldier's chest rose and fell in steady rhythm. His knuckles whitened on the hafts of his axes. The elder raised his staff and stepped back. No beastman moved, The soldier took the opening. Still watching, still wary, he backed slowly into the trees, disappearing into the darkness. They let him go. The survivors of the pack wasted no time. As the storm eased into a steady drizzle, they moved across the battlefield with practiced swiftness, looting what remained, gathering weapons, tearing badges and talismans from the fallen. Some took strips of cloth or bone, others simply carved bloody trophies from the corpses. They paid little mind to their fallen except to loot them too. The wounded limped, dragging savaged limbs or bleeding freely from bullet wounds. No complaints, no pity. They would keep pace or die where they stood. Colum moved among them, silent, his axe still dripping. They slipped back into the woods, fading into the shadows once more. Hours passed, or perhaps only moments. Time meant little in the wake of bloodshed. Eventually, they reached a clearing ringed with old trees. A rough camp took shape without command. Hides stretched into makeshift shelters, a fire coaxed to life from damp wood, meat sizzling on stone. Colum sat near the edge, staring into the flames. One of the beastmen, a thin, pale creature with patchy fur and a crooked smile, tossed him a slab of roasted meat. He caught it, sniffed once, then bit in. He did not ask what it was. He did not care. The heat of it warmed his belly. The blood soothed something deeper. When he lay down, exhaustion crashed over him like a wave. His eyes shut before he willed it, and sleep took him hard and fast. In the dark of his dreams, his body shifted once more. Bones lengthening, muscles hardening, his skin crawling with the itch of change. The runes on his flesh glowed faintly beneath the skin. He slept, and the beast grew. Weeks passed in a blur of mud, blood, and motion. The pack did not linger long in any place. They travelled with tireless, brutal purpose, hunting the many roads that wound like veins through the deep wood. Convoys came and went, soldiers, scouts, missionaries. All were watched. Some were stalked. A few were devoured. Each ambush was a rite, each kill a deepening of the path. And with each assault, something inside Colum shifted further. The runes along his arms throbbed with power after each battle, and during the nights that followed, the fire in his blood rose anew. After the latest raid, a vicious slaughter of a well-armed patrol, Colum had collapsed. His body had simply failed him. He slept for a full day, unmoving and unresponsive. When he woke, his legs were changed. The bones had twisted, the muscles reshaped. His calves were now thick cords of furred muscle, his knees bent backward, and his feet split into cloven hooves that dug into the soil with unnatural strength. When he stood taller. He reached for his face and felt the truth. His jaw had lengthened. His nose was gone. 2 horns curled from his skull, now fully formed. His ears twitched at every sound, and his breath steamed in the morning air. He looked into a pool of rainwater and saw not a man, but something between. A beast becoming. The others greeted him with nods, growls, approving stares. The Ancient One said nothing, but the glance he gave Colum spoke volumes. He was on the path, and the path was claiming him. Others had joined the pack in the time since. Stragglers, deserters, lost souls pulled into the woods by instinct. Only those who came willingly were accepted. The path of the beast had no use for slaves, no tolerance for the broken or unwilling. Only those who proved their strength were welcomed, only those who chose the path freely. The Ancient One had made that clear. Colum remembered his words, guttural and slow, but now perfectly understood. We do not drag the weak behind us, We do not leash or chain. The path cannot be forced. It must be taken with claw and blood and will. And so it was. Some newcomers ran with them only a day before vanishing or falling behind. Others stayed, changed, and found purpose in the hunt. Their blood burned like columns, and the fire in their eyes marked them as kin. It was near dusk when the Ancient One entered the clearing, his cloak wet with rain and his staff slick with mud. In one gnarled hand he carried a severed head. He dropped it in the center of the firelight with a dull, wet thud. At first glance, it looked human. Male, pale, its mouth locked in a rictus of agony. But the moment Colum inhaled, he knew something was wrong. The scent was twisted, wrong in its very essence. And carved into the scalp and cheeks were symbols, not runes, but something else. Symbols that shimmered and crawled, painful to even look at. Hellspawn, the Ancient One spat, voice like gravel dragged across stone. A growl rippled through the clearing. Colum felt it rise in his own chest. The tension in the air was sharp, electric. The Ancient One spoke again, louder now, the words echoing off the trees. They come, not with guns or fire, but with bloodcraft and chains. More growls. Some beastmen stood. Others clenched their fists around halves of axe and spear. They think to master us, the Ancient One snarled, to bend beast to will. That nearly sent the pack into a frenzy. Snarls turned to howls. Weapons scraped stone. Even the wounded stirred. Colum's fist tightened. The thought of being shackled, of being twisted into a slave for some blood magician, it ignited something deep and primal in him. The Ancient One raised his staff. "We hunt," he said simply. And so a new hunt began. It did not take long. Within days they came upon a village nestled in a low vale, its outskirts shrouded in mist and smoke. From their vantage in the tree line, the pack watched in silence. The thatched roofs were scorched, many of the buildings defaced with symbols of dark allegiance. Banners of crimson and black hung limp in the damp wind. Colum crouched beside a twisted pine, his nostrils flaring. The place reeked of corruption, a rot deeper than death. It clawed at his sinuses, a sickly sweet stench of blood and sulphur. Then he saw them. Long lines of villagers, shackled and barefoot, were being marched to a crude altar built in the town square. Around it, cloaked figures moved with ritual precision, chanting in tongues not meant for mortal mouths. Symbols were painted on the stones in viscous black-red ink, and the air shimmered with sorcerous heat. Colum's hands curled into fists. One by one, the prisoners were dragged forward. Some screamed, others had no strength left. The blood from each sacrifice was poured into basins, and as the liquid steamed, the runes carved into the altar pulsed with an inner glow. He looked to the Ancient One. The old beastman stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the ritual with a hatred so cold it burned. Colum could feel it in the pack around him. No snarling, no pacing. Only the razor tension of waiting. The heretics had brought their bloodcraft into the woods, and the woods would answer. They did not charge, not yet. Instead, the pack slunk through the surrounding woods, skirting the edge of the village's influence. Colum moved like shadow between roots and mist, observing, calculating. The place was not undefended. From the north ridge, he spotted several watchtowers freshly constructed, manned by hunched figures with long, wicked rifles. Gun nests had been set up at every approach, dug into the earth and manned by pale-faced heretics. Most disturbing of all was the barbed wire, not dead iron, but something living. It twisted and writhed, coiling like serpents in the half-light, reacting to motion with unnatural hunger. Colum snarled low in his throat. The village had been transformed into a fortress of blood and malice. There would be no simple rush, no storming the square in a tide of muscle and rage. They would be slaughtered. He looked back toward the altar, where the next prisoner was being dragged to their fate. Every instinct within him screamed to cleanse this sickness from the land. But instinct was not enough. Not here. With the village too heavily fortified to strike, the pack melted back into the deeper woods. They spread out through the surrounding trees, forming a wide ring of watchers. They would wait. The storm of vengeance would come, but not today. As dusk faded to night, the woods grew thick with fog and shadow. Colum crouched beneath the bough of a pine, senses sharp, ears twitching at the rustle of leaves not far from their position. Movement, but it was not the heretics. The scent that hit his nostrils was clean, familiar. It carried the tang of sweat, steel, and soil, but none of the twisted bile that marked the corrupted. He tensed. His old countrymen. A small group of them moved silently through the trees, low to the ground, lightly armored to avoid making noise. Veterans, no doubt, scouts or saboteurs. They moved with its speed, navigating the darkening woodland with ease. The beastmen beside Colum snarled low, their blood rising. But the Ancient One lifted a clawed hand. Silence. The pack obeyed. They watched, unseen, as the group crept toward the village perimeter. Colum tracked them with keen eyes, noting the practiced ease of their movements. These were not fools. They had studied the village. They knew its defenses. At the border of the heretic encampment, the lead soldier drew a blade and slid up behind a sentry in a makeshift tower. The kill was silent. Another slid through the grass, gutted a second guard. They moved like ghosts, melting into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. Colum's heart pounded as the witnessing the bloodshed awoke the primal spirit that had grown within him. He will watch the small band disappeared into the village's heart, leaving only the soft rustle of disturbed leaves behind them. It wasn't long before the quiet was broken. Shouts erupted from deep within the village, sharp and panicked. Gunfire followed, short bursts, then the crackling thunder of a larger explosion. A bloom of fire lit the sky, followed by another. From their hidden perches in the forest, the pack watched flames rise behind the rooftops. Then the gates broke open. A flood of people, villagers, bloodied and ragged, poured out into the open, fleeing into the woods. Their bonds had been severed, their cages opened. They screamed as they ran, clutching one another, trampling through the mud with wide, terrified eyes. Colum spotted them among the tide, the saboteurs, though fewer now. Some limped. Others carried the wounded. Their blades and armor were slick with blood. The heretics were quick to respond. From within the village, a chorus of guttural shouts sounded. Red-robed soldiers and misshapen cultists swarmed from the village's heart, weapons raised and eyes alight with fury. The chase had begun. All around him, Colum could feel the pack growing restless. Low growls rumbled through the brush. Clawed hands twitched, jaws clenched. Their bloodlust was a tangible thing, a hunger sharpened by the scent of violence, the sight of prey on the move. And yet they held. The Ancient One had not spoken. He stood among them like a statue, still and silent, his staff planted in the soil. Only his eyes moved, calm, unreadable. The pack obeyed. Colum's claws dug into the dirt as he fought his own instinct to surge forward. Minutes passed, And then Colum understood why the Ancient One had stayed their hand. A ripple passed through the heretic ranks. From the shattered gates of the village emerged a figure that seemed born of nightmare. Towering, swathed in flowing crimson, it moved with unnatural grace. Too many arms sprouted from its torso, each ending in a claw, or had hands grasping infernal relics. Its face was smooth and eyeless, save for a vertical split where a mouth should have been, from which rows of needle-like teeth shimmered in the firelight. Power rolled off it in waves. Colum inhaled sharply. The creature's presence was not unlike that of the Ancient One, but where the Elder radiated ancient wisdom and primal fury, this thing exuded corruption. The taint of hell made flesh. It was escorted by a cadre of heretics clad in thick Baroque armor. They formed a perimeter around the creature, weapons raised, chanting beneath their breath. The abomination halted atop a rise overlooking the chaos. It raised one hand, and from the split in its palm, a burning chain unfurled, crackling like fire on oil. The beast uttered a word. It was broken, shattered, and it hurt to hear. The chain lashed forward with impossible speed, striking one of the fleeing prisoners in the back. The man screamed as the chain coiled around his throat. Flames surged down the links, and in a blink, he was a pillar of fire, shrieking as he burned from the inside out. The pack growled low, the sound like distant thunder. Colum's knuckles whitened around his blade. The hunt would not wait much longer. The abomination prowled forward, its many limbs twitching with unnatural spasms, its pale flesh glistening. The cadre of armored heretics followed in its wake, their chants louder now, a call to whatever profane source granted their strength. More chains unfurled from the demon's limbs, burning with hellfire, sweeping the air in slow, hungry arcs. Then the creature turned, slinking down the slope in pursuit of the escapees. The Ancient One watched it vanish into the fog. Only then did he move. With a single, guttural bark, he raised his staff and slammed it into the earth. The pack erupted, brays, howls, roars. A cacophony of sound rose through the trees as the beastman surged forward. Colum was among them, bounding over root and stone, his lungs full of the storm wind and the scent of prey. Every muscle in his body thrilled with purpose. The forest blurred around him. They were no longer watchers. They were no longer waiting. They were hunters, and the night was theirs. The forest exploded with chaos. The beastmen poured down the slopes like a living avalanche, crashing into the heretic flanks with unstoppable fury. They moved like shadows with teeth, silent, then screaming, striking with such violence that men barely had time to cry out before their throats were torn open. Colum was in the thick of it, his axe eager for blood. He slammed into a red-robed cultist, bearing him to the ground and crushing his skull beneath a hoof. Another turned and raised a firearm. But Colum was faster. His blade split the man from shoulder to hip. Elsewhere, a massive beastman vaulted into the enemy's midst, scattering limbs and gore as it brought its spiked maul down in bone-shattering arcs. Howls mixed with screams as the lines between hunter and hunted vanished entirely. The heretic soldiers tried to form ranks, but their chase of the saboteurs had already been chaotic. Fire and smoke still rose from within the village, casting long, writhing shadows. One of the sorcerer's bodyguards raised a heavy machine gun, but a pair of beastmen tackled him from both sides. With bestial strength, the armored juggernaut was ripped limb from limb. Colum leapt over a fallen tree and drove his axe into a legionnaire, ending the man with a spray of blackened blood. Above it all, the sorcerer hissed. a wordless, hideous shriek that warped the air. A beastman nearby burst into flame, convulsing, and another, who had drawn to close, began to beat at its own head as the sorcerer's corruption filled it. The heretics rallied around the sorcerer, falling into formation with grim precision. Shields raised and weapons drawn, they created a ring of steel and zealotry around the abomination. The beast's many arms flexed, its eyeless face twitching with unnatural spasms. Then it began to speak. Its voice was a flayed thing, broken syllables sewn together by agony and hate. Colum flinched as the words pressed against his mind like hot irons. He staggered as visions burst behind his eyes. Hellscapes of screaming rivers, demon lords seated on thrones of living bodies, the sky writhing with wings of fire and chains. He was not alone. All around him, beastmen howled in pain and confusion. Some clawed at their own skulls. Others fell to their knees, eyes wide with madness. Then a deep, rhythmic chant thundered from the rear of the pack. The Ancient One stepped forward, slamming his staff to the ground, his voice rising in a guttural litany that cut through the fog of corruption like a blade. The pressure in Colum's skull lessened. The fire behind his eyes dimmed. The two forces met not in flesh, but in will. Ancient primal magic clashed with infernal sorcery, as the forest itself seemed to still in witness. Then the silence shattered. The pack roared with renewed fury, their howls and bellows shaking the trees as they surged forward once more. The remaining heretics stood their ground, rallying around the hellspawn. The line between them and the abomination bristled with spears, jagged blades, and shields carved with obscene sigils. The clash was apocalyptic. Steel met fang, sorcery met raw muscle. Colum fought through the chaos like a force of nature, his blade singing as it cleaved through armored zealots. But these were not the scattered cultists of before. The guards of the sorcerer were elite, clad in dark iron, and warded with rites of agony. They fought with brutal precision, striking down even the fiercest of beastmen in bloody duels. Still, the tide could not be stemmed. Amid the chaos, the Ancient One advanced. Step by step, he pressed forward through the maelstrom. His chants never ceased. Each word thundered across the battlefield, clashing against the hellspawn's flayed incantations. Sparks of raw energy crackled in the air, warping the branches, twisting the wind. The two titans were drawing together, sorcery and spirit, corruption and wild will. An inevitable collision looming on the blood-soaked field. The hellspawn raised one of its many arms, holding aloft a cursed relic, a jagged, smoking icon etched with writhing sigils. It pointed the relic at the Ancient One, and a pulse of crimson light surged forward, warping the air like heat above a pyre. But the Ancient One moved. In a blur of impossible speed, he closed the distance. His claws caught the outstretched arm before the spell could fully unfurl. With a guttural snarl, he ripped the limb clean from the socket. The hellspawn shrieked, a sound like 1,000 knives scraping glass. But it had no time to recover. The Ancient One brought the severed arm down like a club, striking the sorcerer again and again. The wet, meaty smacks echoing over the battlefield. With every blow, the tide seemed to turn. Beastmen howled. Heretics faltered. Then, with a final snarling curse, the Ancient One dropped the bludgeoned limb and plunged his clawed hand into the hellspawn's chest. He ripped free its heart, if the squirming blackened thing could be called such, and held it high. Then he crushed it. The heart burst into flame, and the hellspawn screamed once more, its body twisting in impossible spasms before collapsing in on itself in a wave of withering flesh and crackling magic. The field fell silent, and then the pack roared. Their brazen bellows split the night, shaking ash from the branches and blood from the soil. With the sorcerer slain, the spell broken, and the abomination vanquished, their fury reignited. The remaining heretics were given no quarter. The beastmen surged through the shattered lines, tearing through the last defenders with claws, blades, and bone. Screams arose only to be swallowed by snarls. Limbs flew, steel bent, flesh split. It was not battle, it was slaughter. Colum moved through the carnage like a wraith, his axe a blur. He did not hesitate. These were not his countrymen. These were not worthy foes. These were the hell-spawn filth, and they would feed the roots. The blood ran thick and hot, steaming in the cold air. Only when the last heretic fell, torn in half beneath a beastman's goring charge, did the pack slow. And then, finally, the forest exhaled. Colum stood amid the wreckage, his breath steaming in the night air, chest rising with deep, heaving gulps. His body ached with the remnants of battle, but inside him, something else stirred, something triumphant. He looked down at his hands, at the blackened claws, the fur matted with blood. His reflection caught in a pool of gore, horns gleaming, eyes wild, a snarl on his lips. There was no man there any more, only purpose, only the beast. He welcomed it. With a slow, deliberate motion, Colum raised his head and let out a deep, guttural bray that echoed across the trees. Around him the pack answered, a chorus of triumph, of blood, of belonging. In that moment, Colum let go of the last vestige of who he had been. His soul was no longer torn. It was wild, whole, his. He had chosen the path, and the path had claimed him utterly.